Well, it's been a rough 2 weeks for the Cincinnati Bengals, and they lost two heartbreaking games in two very different ways the past 2 weeks. And I don't know exactly what to say of what transpired on Sunday night. We will touch on that. Hello, everyone. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza, joining you once again, and with me is co-host John Sheeran. John, I don't know what time you turned that game off on Sunday, but hopefully you didn't watch every single second of that debacle. It was pretty ugly.
That's what sucks about being the editor. I got to watch every painstaking minute of every game.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is we thought it would either be a shootout in a really fun game, or maybe something. We didn't think it would be that bad, but maybe something resembling a 5-touchdown loss. I just, and you lose by 5 touchdowns right after you lose to your bitter rivals at the last second. It's pretty tough. Joining us for the first time in 2 months, right? Since the beginning of the season, Scott Schulte. Scott,
been a little while.
Yeah, how are you, sir? I know it's almost been a tale of 2 seasons since we've had you on. Started off 4-1, and then all of a sudden these last 2 losses. I guess since we haven't had John for a little bit, your thoughts on what this Bengals team kind of started out as, since we haven't had you on. Rough 2 years prior. Pretty good start this year. Faltered recently. What do you think?
Yeah, most people. I think Vegas had him at 5 or 6 wins. I think most fans were kind of hoping 8 or 9 wins. So starting 4-1 was obviously very exciting, but of course part of that is you have to look at who were they playing to get to 4-1. It's not like they were playing the Patriots and the Chiefs, and obviously we saw it happen when they played the Chiefs. But yeah, so I think the 4-1 was probably ahead of expectations and maybe got people a little extra excited, and then they came down to earth when the Steelers game I think deflated a lot of people, but they were right in that to the end. And then the Chiefs game, it was a road game, very good team. But yeah, still that was. So I think, at the end of the day, if you would have told us at the beginning of the year, they'd be 4-3 at this point without getting anything from Billy Price, without getting anything from John Ross. I think most fans would probably have said, 2 months ago, that's a position I'm okay with. I like that. It kind of puts you right there in the hunt for the division for a wild card spot. You're in the playoff hunt. You're right there. You haven't gotten contributions from some of the guys you wanted to get contributions from, like Perfect and, some of his other people. So I think that's at the end of the day, it's a nice spot overall. It's obviously not great, but yeah, after 7 games, I think heading into the Tampa Bay game, it's a decent spot to be in.
Yes, and there's a lot of that we will talk about tonight. We're not going to really go through. We're not going to really go through either loss too much tonight, because really we talked about the Steelers a lot last week, and then I'm not quite sure what we could really break down this week aside from just the Bengals getting utterly demolished. So we won't talk too much about that, but more about what's ahead, what's the problem, what are the problems with the Cincinnati Bengals currently, and how they could fix them. We'll also be joined by Gene Thomas of pretty funny podcast name, Buck What You Heard podcast. He runs a cool podcast there, and he will be joining us later in the program to preview Week 8. But there are so many things we could point to as to issues and all of that. But a little bit to Scott's point, the Bengals are still in the AFC North hunt. We kind of feel like the sky is falling. All these injuries are coming out. To Scott's point, the Bengals are still in the AFC North race, but things need to change. So I'll start with you, John. What right now, if you could pick one thing out of a hat, and it would be a pretty full hat, what is the one thing you would sit here and say, this is the one major thing that the Bengals need to change? Now, it can be anything from coaching to just the defense, to a scheme, play calling, something within the organization. What's the one thing that you think is plaguing this team the most currently right now?
I could just say Marvin Lewis and be done with it, but to go for a deeper answer, When we did our season previews, I mentioned the health of Cordy Glenn, Tyler Eifert, and John Ross being crucial for this team to get in that double-digit win range. And so far, Eifert is going to miss 12 games this year, or 12 and a half, I guess. John Ross has already missed a handful, and we don't know when he'll be back. And since Eifert has been hurt, and in the games that Ross hasn't been played, the offense hasn't eclipsed 20 points. So they had 20 points against Steelers, and that's been it. So it's been offensive inefficiencies without two of their best playmakers. And that was something that me and I'm sure a lot of other people were concerned about, because relying on those two guys when they've had durability issues in the past was always dangerous. And the same kind of goes to the defense when relying on Burfict's play and emotional leadership and his, constant antics and whatnot. So I think they just have to learn how to stay in games with let's just say a bad defense, because they're not going to be able to keep teams under 20 points, especially games like the Buccaneers and the Saints and the Chargers later in the year. They're not going to be able to keep those teams under the minimal points that they put up without Eifert and Ross. If they can't, well, they can't count Ross or Eifert obviously, but if they don't have Ross, then they need to find a way to successfully run an offense through just AJ Green, Boyd, and I guess Uzoma. Maybe use Mixon more creatively in the passing game. Use Bernard and Mixon more efficiently in the running game. Use what they do best. Utilize them to their strengths. I just think that all falls on Bill Lazor and Andy Dalton just making the proper adjustments going forward to overcome the health issues that they have on offense, because they can't count on their defense right now or in the foreseeable future. So I think that just puts even more pressure on the offense to work with what they have.
So you kind of touched on a few things there, but it sounded like the injuries were the crux of, and
yeah.
That's okay, because really one thing, if we pick one thing, it usually feeds into a couple of other things, right? I mean, that's just how this goes. So if I heard you correctly, you're saying basically the injuries, especially to key players they were relying on offense, is probably the thing that's hurting them the most at this point. Am I correct?
They need to score. They need to score points, even if things don't always go their way. Basically,
yeah. Not just to John's point a little bit on the injury front. Not a good report on Wednesday heading into Week 8 against the Buccaneers. Yeah, Vontaze Burfict, who had left the Chiefs game early with a hip injury. Darqueze Dennard, who left the Steelers game early with this is a really, really fun word to say, sternoclavicular injury. John Ross, that lingering groin issue. Nick Vigil, the knee issue. Tyler Kroft, his foot injury. Giovanni Bernard, the knee injury he suffered apparently against the Falcons. You have Bobby Hart now on the injury report with a back injury, and Dre Kirkpatrick with an Achilles injury. So to John's point, this is a battered team on both sides of the ball. And I do like the point that you made it with Eifert and Ross, John, just in the fact that, some people are saying, oh, well, if the Bengals were relying on Eifert to move their offense through, that was a mistake on their part. They weren't just relying. They had AJ Green, right? They have Tyler Boyd that they like. They had Eifert, yes. They like Kroft. They like Uzoma. They like Gio provides a lot of stuff, and then they liked Ross. So they were relying on all of those guys, and 4 of those names are not currently available and haven't been available for a while. So to those people saying, well, if they were just relying on Eifert, then they were making a mistake. No, they were relying on about 6 or 7 guys at the skill positions, and 4 of those guys are currently unavailable. So that's not good. Scott, your one aspect that you think is plaguing the Bengals the most at this point?
I guess if I were to pick one thing, I mean, it's like I said, it's very hard to isolate one. For me, it's got to be the defense. I mean, they're 28th in the NFL. They lost Gunther, brought in Terrell Austin. People were saying, oh, they're going to be more aggressive. It's more of a they're going to have more turnovers. They have this aggression. The pass rush has essentially been non-existent. I mean, the Chiefs game against backup offensive linemen had very little pass rush. They had no pass rush against Ben Roethlisberger the week before. Carl Lawson, who had 7 or 8 sacks last year, has 1 this year. And some of the the personnel selections and some of the defensive schemes they're calling. I mean, they've had Hardy Nickerson out there for more snaps than Carl Lawson. To me, that's not a good situation. And when Lawson is out there, granted, he doesn't. I mean, he was a beast in preseason of last year. This year, when I see him, I don't know. I'll try to keep it brief because I know we're just trying to give one thing. But yeah, I wish they would put William Jackson over the team's top receiver the whole game and not just kind of put him to a side or a scheme like, put him on Tyreek Hill the whole game. Don't just let him, he's going to be on this spot and then let the offense line up, inferior guys against him so they can get other guys open. If Lawson's that good, put him out there. And if Hardy Nickerson's not, I'm haven't been impressed with him. I'd find
anybody has.
Vinny, right? Put somebody, or even put Fedulum as like that nickel kind of, that third safety, whatever, something. If I knew what the answer was, I'd probably be in coaching. But I think I can see what the answer is not, and it's definitely not whatever they're doing. And I think it's just a mix of things. Schemes, personnel decisions, and even when there was that play, I think it was against the Steelers, when they brought this all-out blitz, and I've watched that thing several times, and they looked like they sent like 8 or 9 guys, and still had no pressure on Ben Roethlisberger. There's no way you can send 9 on 5 or 9 on 6, and not at least get one guy within a couple of feet of him. So they've just absolutely got to fix and the pass rush looked great in the preseason, and once they started playing for real, it just totally vanished. So they've just got to figure out what to do on defense. And I think it's not a simple fix as far as one thing. The linebackers can't tackle, the defensive front isn't getting the pass rush. It's a mix of things. So I'll just say defense and leave it at that.
And that's a very easy place to point to and a very accurate place to point to. And unfortunately, what was Terrell Austin's reputation in Detroit, which is kind of a feast or famine type of defense, has been the case here in Cincinnati. They have a couple of games where they have big turnovers for touchdowns, where they have a couple of games where the pass rush is awesome, a couple of halves where the pass rush actually does some good things, but then they have games where they totally disappear. They have games where the turnovers are not there, and obviously that either leads to losses or very close games that maybe shouldn't be a close game. And just kind of a caveat. It's sometimes people lump them together, but a lot of times they are 3 different phases. The special teams crew has given up quite a few mistakes and big plays as well this year, which is a little bit uncharacteristic. I'm going to say for me, I don't disagree with either of you. I'm going to say for me, there's been some underachievement with former high picks, and be it in the form of injuries or be it in the form of just Terrell Austin's defense or what have you. Jordan Willis, a guy I was really high on, hasn't really done much as a Cincinnati Bengal. John Ross, as you mentioned, John, hurt a lot. When he's out there, the offense is different, and he has grabbed 2 touchdowns this year, but he can't stay healthy. Tyler Eifert, another high pick, gone for the year again. Cedric Ogbuehi, wasted pick at this point. Jake Fisher, wasted pick at this point. A couple of third-round linebackers the Bengals have invested in. P.J. Dawson a couple of years ago, not even on the team anymore. The kid this year from Texas, not getting any time on defense when clearly guys like Hardy Nickerson and others are struggling. To me, a long time ago, first-round picks, Dalton, Green, Dunlap, in the first and second round, have come out and played pretty well. But some of these other guys, there was a tweet from our good friend Joe Goodberry that he put out during the Steelers game that I thought was pretty awesome. And he listed out, I think, the first-round picks from 2013 through 2018. And at a point during the game, I think you could even put 2012 in there with Dre Kirkpatrick. Mm-hmm. But basically 2012 through 2018, at a point in the game against the Steelers, not one of those players was on the field. Not one. And then you also look at 2012, Kevin Zeitler, a pretty damn good offensive guard. He's not even on the team anymore. They let him go in free agency. So my problem is, and spoiler alert, this is probably going to feed into the next part of this question in the next segment, but my problem is these high draft picks that are not pulling their weight. And whether that is coaching, whether that is scheme, whether that is, I don't know what exactly it is. This team can't afford, when they've invested so much into the draft, they can't afford to have all these high picks not doing well, and especially when they have had 2 straight losing seasons. And they started off hot this year. They keep losing to the good teams. They need to have these marquee players on the field, available, and play well. I understand injuries; they happen. Sometimes it's a bad luck thing, and the team can't necessarily always help that. But to me, this is absolutely killing the team. And I don't know exactly all of the specific reasons for it, but I see it, and you don't see these guys on the field, and that to me is troubling. So those are some of the issues that we on the Orange and Black Insider pointed out. I'm saying the high draft picks not pulling their weight. Our good friend Scott Schulte and co-host Scott Schulte says the defense is not up to snuff, which is definitely the case. And my co-host John Sheeran says injuries, among other facets, is to blame for a lot of the Bengals issues going forward. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We are so happy to have you with us, even though the team has lost 2 in a row and 2 in pretty ugly fashion. We're still happy to have you with us, and we're still happy to be talking Bengals with you weekly on this program. You can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, on CincyJungle.com. It's on Art19, and of course you can get it on YouTube, and you can subscribe to those channels. Please do. We're on Twitter at BengalsOBI, and get in touch with us. We're going to take some listener questions later in the program. We do have Gene Thomas from the Buck What You Heard podcast. I wish I was as creative with our podcast name as he was with his, because that's a pretty cool name. To preview Week 8 with the Buccaneers, we're looking forward to having him on in just a little bit here. John, so what's the fix? You're saying injuries. What's the fix here? And if you want to say there's another fix outside of the injury issue, that's fine. But if you're going to stick with injuries, is it, hey, that medical staff still isn't up to snuff? Hey, they're not scouting players, the right players, or they're not doing their due diligence on some of these players who have had either previous health issues or what have you. Or is there something else where you're saying that's where the Bengals got to go?
I don't know, man. Like to your point, most of their first round picks have had their fair share of injuries, and I guess that's not specifically a Bengals issue. I guess it's more just a random luck thing. Like specifically like Darqueze Dennard, William Jackson, like maybe even Drake or Patrick. Like none of those guys had injury concerns in college, and then all of a sudden they miss significant time here and there, and it's just kind of the nature of the game, I guess. But like from what I said about the offense, I just think that you just got to be able to find a way about spreading the ball around a little bit more efficiently, because you're not going to have that guy in John Ross for the foreseeable future to spread the defense out and keep them on their toes a little bit. And maybe that's continuing to do what AJ Green does best right now, and that's using him out of the slot. It's it's getting Mixon maybe lined out wide a little bit more. Like I said earlier, is running Mixon out of keeping Mixon in the shotgun for runs, because that's where statistically he does better, even if he didn't quite work out against the Chiefs. When Giovanni Bernard comes back, you can run him under center because he's one of the best backs in the league in doing that. We can still pound the table about Christian Westerman over Alex Redmond at right guard, and we can still talk about, hey, maybe putting Billy Price at right guard over him, because Redmond has just been constant liability and pass protection there. There's just a multitude of different things that we just need to see Bill Lazor and Lewis, work together and adjust accordingly, because as we know, under Lewis, things are pretty stubborn during the middle of the season, and they don't typically make any changes, or if they do make changes, they don't make the right ones. And it's kind of just the overall theme with successful teams under Marvin Lewis, is that he's usually carried by his offensive and defensive coordinators. And when they were doing well, we praised Laser and Austin, rightfully so, because both of those units were playing very well under their leadership. And when they've been terrible the last 2 weeks, we've both put blame on both of those guys because of, different issues. So I just think it really comes down to, are they worthy of the praise that we gave them earlier if they can, overcome unfortunate things, because this is the NFL, and the Eagles last year won the Super Bowl without their starting quarterback and left tackle. I'm not saying that Bill Lazor has to be Doug Peterson and Frank Reich in that case, but if this team is serious about contending for the playoffs, which I don't think any of us believe they are, they have to show it in these next couple of weeks with all that's going on.
Agreed. Mike Brown, the owner, has been a guy who obviously has said that he wants a championship, and Marvin Lewis has said the same, but the actions don't match the words, unfortunately, sometimes. And they tease us, they get close, but they get to the playoffs at times, but then they fall on their face, and unfortunately it's in big games like the last two that we've seen. So pretty difficult to see, and like you said, they're just very, very questionable decisions. Scott, your one big fix for the team on this 2-game losing streak, based on what either your reasoning or anything we've talked about so far?
I guess my if I was to have one big change, it would be the big change I think a lot of fans have been hoping for many, many years. And that would be for Marvin Lewis to finally have that come to Jesus moment in regards to halftime adjustments or in-game adjustments. When you see a game like the Chiefs, where the Chiefs keep doing the same thing over and over, and you keep looking as inept as you do over and over, at some point, you've got to chat with your coordinator, chat with someone, positional coach or someone, say, hey, whatever we're doing isn't just working. It's just not, it's worse than not working. We need to try anything. And you would think after it's 15, 16, 17, whatever many years since 2003, whatever the math, 15 years, that at some point he would come to that realization. And that would be my one big thing. Now there's a few small things. There's much simpler things because I don't know if that moment is going to happen. The small things I'd do, I'd stop handing the ball off to Walton. I would stop running behind the middle or right side of the offensive line. I would scheme a pass rush where I don't need to rely on Geno Atkins to be a dominant all-pro beast to win 101, that I can actually get other guys involved in the pass rush by the way we are scheming or lining or whatever we're doing. Those would be the simple things. The bigger thing would be, like I mentioned, that whole thing and adjusting and not determining your scheme before the game and then refusing to deviate from it when it obviously doesn't work.
So, yeah. And so it sounds like both of yours in different ways go back to the root of coaching, right? John, you're kind of talking about personnel decisions and things of that nature, correct?
Mm.
Scott, you're kind of talking about, halftime adjustments and things of that nature. So, those are two separate issues, but they do come down to coaching and whatnot. I'm going to kind of go a little bit, I guess, higher in the organizational hierarchy, and I'm going to play off of what I said about the draft. And I've said this before on this program and on CincyJungle.com and all kinds of things. I think there needs to be a shift in the offseason focus. And, I think relying on the draft is a sage and wise strategy, especially for a small to mid-market team that doesn't, spend the big bucks or makes this always the splashiest moves in the offseason. But I can't see the value of what they're doing when their first round picks and even other, third round picks and things of that nature are not either they're not on the team, they're not producing or, whatever, or they're injured. That's not bearing fruit. And then you have other issues. where the Bengals hoard these compensatory picks, and the compensatory picks aren't bearing fruit. So, you sit here, and there was a commenter, I can't remember who it was, on a post today on cincyjungle.com. It might have been on one of the things I put up. I can't remember, but basically he outlined the compensatory picks and who they grabbed, and it was like, whoa. I mean, there's nobody there that has made an impact. And not only that, not only do they grab the compensatory picks, but they don't really maneuver. And now, granted, that's a new thing that you can maneuver with the compensatory picks, but they don't even really maneuver that much with the picks that they have. So when you sit here, my thing is, and I put this in writing, when you really focus on the draft and you really hoard these picks, you, number one, need to basically hit on a higher percentage than most teams do, because they're not doing much in free agents, outside free agency. So you need to hit on a higher percentage than most of these picks, and you have to properly develop them, and then you have to keep them. So for a while, and including the past couple of years, the Bengals have done okay in keeping a lot of their guys, but there was that stretch in 2016, 2017 where they lost a core group of guys, and it really set them back. So my thing is you got to either, if you're going to really still keep that draft-centric mindset, you got to either add a bunch of scouts and really do your due diligence on what you're doing in that respect, and move around, be flexible to move around to get the impact player that you want. Or you have to be a team that says, you know what, we do need that one or two upper tier 2 outside free agent that's out there. You then kind of do the rental deals that we normally do, and then supplement that with the draft process that we've normally done. They're putting all of their eggs in one basket, and it keeps turning around and biting them these past 3 years. And I don't see it. It was, a commenter on Cincy Jungle. I found the comment. These are basically every compensatory pick, I think, since 2011 that they put out, or in recent years. These are the guys: Reed Fragel, T.J. Johnson, Marquise Flowers, Lavelle Westbrooks, Paul Dawson, Marcus Hardison, Ryan Glasgow, J.J. Dealman, and Mason Schreck.
A lot of quality guys there.
So, I mean, that's what you're keeping these picks for, I guess.
Meanwhile, Damon Harrison's getting traded for a 5th-round pick. Right.
So, I think that the Bengals need a shift of approach there, along with, of course, what you guys said. And I think mine is a bit more long-term process, and will take some major organizational changes in order for that to happen. Yours can be immediate fixes, and probably can be ones that the Bengals can use going forward in this season, and maybe still salvage a possible playoff berth. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Kazenza, and I'm joined by Scott Schulte. Finally, for past 2 months, we've missed him, and my usual co-host, John Sheeran. We appreciate you tuning into this program. We're on iTunes, we're on YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play, cincyjungle.com, and all of our stuff is on Art19. We're going to now adjust our focus a bit to Week 8 and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we have Gene Thomas from one of the best podcast names I've heard in a long time, Buck What You Heard. Gene, before we kind of dive into this matchup, which is one that we don't see very often between the Bengals and the Buccaneers, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the podcasting, and I would assume you're kind of in the Tampa Bay area, maybe?
Yeah, I'm from Tampa originally, and right now my job moved me out to Phoenix. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, but I do get to go back to games in Tampa all the time. So home is home, and I've been doing podcasting since like 2013, and just kind of on and off. And I really didn't like the way the media was presenting the small market team, so I just kind of gave myself an opportunity to go out there and give a voice for the fans. A lot of my stuff is fan related, and I would rather listen to a podcast like yours to get insight on a team rather than go to NFL Network or ESPN to get that kind of information, because you're asking questions that fans want to know, and that's what I want to know about. So like you, I'm out here getting different guests on and trying to get the fans' perspective, as well as get some knowledgeable people on that can help the listeners to know a little bit more.
Well, super grateful that you made the time to come on tonight, and I am pretty stoked to go on your show as well here. You've graciously invited me to come onto your program, so if for the fans and listeners of this show, definitely listen to the Buck What You Heard podcast this week and going forward. And I like what you said about the I guess the media bias a little bit in terms of NFL teams. Obviously, the Buccaneers are, they've won a Super Bowl, so they were pretty popular for a while. But they've kind of get lost in the shuffle, as do the Bengals sometimes in terms of overall popularity in the NFL. And it's good to have a soundboard and a platform, like you said, for listeners and fans to have their voice be heard. And like I said to our listeners later, we'll be ending the show with text, calls, emails, all that stuff. So stay tuned for that. So Gene, I'm just gonna start it off with you. I'm gonna go super obvious, and then we're gonna kind of just roundtable this thing. The quarterback issue in Tampa Bay. I don't even know if it's really an issue anymore, based on the fact that Tampa Bay won last week. But Ryan Fitzpatrick, and trust Bengals folks, we know who Ryan Fitzpatrick is and what he's about and all of that. We've seen a lot. And Ryan Fitzpatrick did what Ryan Fitzpatrick does, which is has a couple of insane games, then a couple of games where you're going, dude, what are you doing? That result in losses. But he had that fan base energized. Jameis Winston, obviously a more talented guy, but sometimes doesn't have it all together upstairs. What is the pulse of the quarterback position going forward with Tampa Bay? And obviously they're committed to Jameis because he was the number 1 overall pick. But right. Is that kind of positive with him?
Yeah, that's very accurate. And I guess for a lot of fans weren't real happy with his performance against the Cleveland Browns. Me personally, I was fine with what he did. They won the game. He was able to drive down the field and actually put them in a position to score at the end of the game. So he did what a quarterback is supposed to do, put his team in a position to win. A lot of people aren't happy with the turnovers. A lot of people talk about his inconsistencies, but what I've seen from him is constant progression since his rookie season. A lot of people are going to disagree with you, but if you look at the stats, I mean, that's kind of what they show. We just need the wins and losses to kind of back that up. I'm excited about this game. This is a good measuring stick to see where Jameis Winston is playing against a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, getting to see a Geno Atkins out there and some of the other defensive players as well. So I'm kind of excited to see what this offense can do against that defense.
So we all watched, because the Bengals weren't playing at 1, I got the opportunity to watch the Bucs play the Browns because it was in the Ohio market, and I guess we all kind of saw how that game turned out. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that Chandler Cantanazaro can make that field goal again?
I'm fine with it. I think he can. It's all in his head, Kickers have it from the neck up. They could have all the physical tools in the world, but if they don't have it from the neck up, I don't know. That's just kind of what messes them up. And you saw he missed that extra point, and then he missed a field goal, and then he turns around and kicks the ball short of going through the end zone. But at the end of the game, they gave him a chance, 59-yard kick, and he nails it.
Talking with Gene Thomas of the Buck What You Heard Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. So glad to have you with us. I like you, I guess. You mentioned you live in Arizona, Gene. Now, I live in Southern California, so I saw a ton of Ronald Jones. And I absolutely loved the kid. I loved it. I loved him in college. Mm-hmm. The stats so far, I think he's maybe battled a couple little nicks and whatnot, but you look at his stats, nothing truly jumps out at you. He's got the 1 touchdown, but that kid was explosive in college. He's got great speed, but he is kind of the one cut guy. Your thoughts on him and his future with the Buccaneers? I mean, obviously Tampa Bay now has a lot of explosive playmakers at the skill positions, and I think he can be one, but your thoughts on him and his future?
Well, I like Ronald Jones. I think as he comes along, as the season progresses, you'll start to see more and more of him. I think they've been bringing him along. I think he's had issues with the playbook, learning the playbook and putting himself, on the field. You had another early in the season, you had another running back, Sean Wilson, who was a special teams guy. And Ronald Jones is, not a special teams guy, and with USC, as you know, they're not assigning those running backs to go out and block or,
Right.
pick the blitzes or anything like that. So he's learning a whole nother facet of the NFL. And I think he's coming along very good, where he's able to catch passes out of the backfield, which now is like a prerequisite for running back, is you have to have some kind of hands, coming out of the backfield for a lot of these offensive coordinators. So looking at Ronald Jones, I'm patient. I feel like, he's a rookie. Let's bring him along slowly, and eventually he will get out there and show what he can do when the time comes.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's one, if you want to do a correlation or a silver lining for Ronald Jones in his future, Giovanni Bernard, a running back for the Bengals, was a guy who was known as he did some kick returns in college. He obviously ran the ball, caught the ball, but he has been a very good blocker. He has become a very good blocker in the NFL. So that is something that obviously if Jones works on, that he could hone his craft. Big news for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is that they fired recently Mike Smith, right? Yes. The defensive coordinator. I believe he was the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL. And, obviously a big name, a guy that was a head coach and led to the Falcons to some success. Deserved, a little too quick to pull the rug out from under him. Your thoughts on him and what's going forward? I think it's Mark Duffner who's taken over, an old Bengals coach,
Mark
right?
Duffner. You guys are familiar with Mark Duffner, I'm sure, if you go back that far. I'm fine with it. It needed to happen. If you look at the play calling, defensive play calling, and the execution, it wasn't there. It just something was missing. There were games last year, year before. The one consistency I remember, there's always that one game where these players were looking lost out there. And it was just frustrating to watch this when you've got guys that have been together, the core has been together, but you still have guys that are out there looking confused and nobody can bring everything together. What you saw last week was a more energized defense, and they looked like they were all on the same page, and you saw a lot less of what you've seen in the past weeks from Mike Smith play calling and more of fire from the Duffner play calling.
So about that defense, according to expected points, it's a little bit worse than the Bengals, and the Bengals defense has been obviously awful. And what you guys just suffered was a Quan Alexander injury. Talk about maybe the impact of how his absence would impact the defense going forward under the new defensive coordinator, and if your guys' replacement could do something to an effect of kind of compensating for the loss of a guy like Quan, who when I see on Twitter, he's kind of like that emotional leader of that defense.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is, and he meant a lot for this team. He was your quarterback on the defensive side of the ball, and just losing him was huge. There was a interview with JPP, and he even said that this guy, just playing with him, he's looking forward to playing with him next year. And you have a consummate professional like JPP to say something like that speaks volumes about that player. So yeah, I like him. I had been on him a little bit, if you watch some of my past podcasts, for being undisciplined in some of the games that they've played. But this last game, while he was on the field, he really made up for a lot of that against the Cleveland Browns.
Talking with Gene Thomas of Buck What You Heard podcast, previewing Week 8 against the Cincinnati Bengals as the Buccaneers travel to Cincinnati this week and take on a game of two interesting and somewhat under the radar teams. We're going to get you out of here in just a few minutes here, Gene. Appreciate the time.
I want to jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities, I mean, injury-wise with the Cincinnati Bengals. I was just looking at some of the injuries that you guys have. I mean, Trayvon Henderson, Tyler Eifert, John Ross with a nagging groin injury, just a lot, Giovanni Bernard. And you got a lot of guys that when you started the season, these were guys that were key pieces in putting the Cincinnati Bengals in a position to make that playoff run. And then you lose these guys, and it kind of changes how you do things. I realize that it's next man up. But again, these are guys that you kind of were expecting to come in and make plays and put this team in that position. When you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, you lose Vernon Hargraves, Chris Conte, a guy that Kendall Beckwith, who had a huge season last year at linebacker, and he's lost with an injury before the season started. Then you lose Jack Sitchie, a linebacker, and then Quan Alexander. So and we don't even know if Gerald McCoy is going to be playing on Sunday. So a lot of injuries along that defensive side of the ball, and guys that we really expected to make plays, moving forward through the season.
Yeah, and for the Bengals on offense, it's no coincidence they were putting up quite a few points the first, 3 weeks of the season, 3-4 weeks of the season. Then they start losing Tyler Eifert, John Ross, all these guys, Tyler Croft, their other tight end, and the points drop a bit. But I like that you brought up Tyler Eifert, because that's where I'm going kind of with my next question, because a lot of fans a couple of years ago wanted to see the Bengals draft O.J. Howard, not only as a potential, hey, Eifert gets hurt a lot. Eifert's great. He gets hurt a lot. But not only as a potential replacement type of guy if he gets hurt, but a guy that you can put both of those guys out there. Nice safety blanket. How have the Buccaneers fans been pretty pleased with what he's done so far for them?
Oh, most definitely. In the beginning, I can tell you for a fact that it was split, because Florida is a football state. Mm-hmm. So you got guys coming out of college that certain fan base members want. I want this guy. And when the Bucs had a chance to pick him at number 19, you would have to be crazy not to take an O.J. Howard at 19, regardless of who you have at tight end. So getting him was a blessing, because I look at this guy. He can block. He's physical. He takes up space, and he's learning how to use his body to make catches. So I'm really looking forward to him.
Yeah, I mean, phenomenal player, and I think he was a polished player, but obviously needed a little bit of grooming. But good to see that he's making an impact for the Buccaneers. And if you, Gene, have watched anything about the Bengals defense, their covering of tight ends is not it's not one of their strong points. So O.J. Howard may have a pretty solid day going forward here. Your thoughts on how this game plays out? Kind of, a couple of these defenses that have been letting up a lot of points. Like you said, though, Mark Duffner, a guy who is pretty familiar with the Bengals, Marvin Lewis and company, taking over now the defensive coordinator duties. Tampa Bay travels. Bengals are at home. Like you said, a lot of similarities both between the teams and what they look like and the injury front. How do you see this one playing out?
Well, the defense is going to have to execute. What they say, X's and O's don't care about personnel. So you got to go out there. Whatever play is drawn up, you have to execute. You can't be out of position or put yourself in a position where you mess up the rest of the defense. So they have to go out there and play. They have to get pressure on the quarterback. The Vita Vea has been doing very well, as a run stopper. I'm very happy with where he's at. And he's continually making progress. Jason Pierre-Paul is another guy. You have to account for him at all times, and he can get to the quarterback. So the linebacker core, even though you're missing a Quan Alexander, you do have a Levante David and some of your other linebackers as well. So there are players out there that can make plays, and again, it's going to be up to the Bucs to get those stops and get those 3 and outs and get the ball back to the offense. So that's going to be the key. And when you come back to offense, Jameis Winston, you got to cut out the turnovers. You can't have penalties. And again, on the offensive side of the ball, these guys have to catch the ball. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Cameron Brate, OJ Howard. These guys have to go out there. Deshaun Jackson. These guys have to go out there and catch those balls.
Yeah, obviously Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson are the two bigger names, but I like that Chris Godwin kid. He can play, man. I watched a couple of nice grabs he made last week against the Browns as I paid attention to that game before the Sunday night debacle that we got to witness. Gene Thomas with the Buck What You Heard podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Just tell our listeners how to get in touch with you and at least follow you this week and maybe even into the playoffs if Tampa Bay makes it that far so they can kind of keep in touch with you.
I love talking football, so you can reach me at Buck What You Heard on Twitter. That's normally where I hang out and catch some of my mindless tweets or, eventually sometimes I do actually talk about football, but I do engage with everybody. So if you follow me, I'll follow you back.
Awesome. Well, our pleasure having you on, man. I appreciate you reaching out and yeah, super stoked that you're part of this program and enjoy the game this Sunday. It should be fun. It could be fun. A lot of points, probably, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to, man. Like I said, it's a measuring stick to see where the Bucks are.
Yep. All right. See you later, Gene. Appreciate it. Awesome to talk to Gene Thomas there. Really, really stoked to have him on this program and. He brought some awesome knowledge. Like I said, not a team that the Bengals face a lot, so there's not a lot of familiarity there going forward. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We are so excited to have the live listeners with us, and we are so grateful for you downloading this program, even if it's after the fact. If you can at some point join us live, we would love to have you join us live. We're usually on Wednesday nights. I do want to say this. We may have a little bit, just a preemptive, we may have a little bit of a scheduling issue next week because it's Halloween, and I have a little guy, and Scott has a little guy. So we may have to go take those guys out trick-or-treating. So we may do a Tuesday or Thursday night podcast. We'll try and work around that. It is the bye week, so hey, we're gonna kind of be a little lax next week too, but that doesn't mean we won't have much to talk about. We'll still have stuff to talk about, but just gonna let you know we might not record Wednesday night live next week. It might be a Tuesday night or a Thursday night at this point. That's probably what we're looking at. So keep it to @BengalsOBI on Twitter for the information on that, or if you just don't hear about it, it'll be on the feed and you can continue to download this program as you usually do on iTunes, on YouTube, on Stitcher, on Google Play, at CincyJungle.com, and at Art19. So appreciate all of that. We're going to get to some listener questions. You can call or text in 949-542-6241, 949-542-6241. And we will try and get to your questions as we can, call or text. We do have an email question already that was sent to us from our a regular listener of ours, and quite apropos because it's from Michael Myers as we are on the precipice of Halloween. Michael Myers has an email that says, "Hi," it's a little lengthy, so I'm going to try and get to the meat of it. "Hi, Anthony. Just wanted your opinion on this, and no, it's not due to the loss of the Chiefs, but more about the past few seasons and an article I read today. Could we see another exodus like the Raiders are doing anytime soon?" Now, in case you missed it, both the Raiders and the Giants appear to be in fire sale mode. Could we see a mass exodus of players? We've seen the Bengals do this already with Chad, Carson, TJ in 2010. The Raiders have given up, but did acquire 3 first-round picks in the next 3 years. He mentions the Browns. Could we see Andy Dalton, Green, Burfict, Kirkpatrick, and others be on the outs due to age and a season that is not looking good? not to mention Marvin's lack of success. So I'm going to tell you this. Gino and Carlos Dunlap will probably not be in this conversation because they just signed extensions this offseason. But there are other stars that could be. And you never know. I don't think this is in the DNA of an Andy Dalton or an AJ Green, but you never know about disgruntled guys in terms of losing to the Steelers, all of that. I don't think the Bengals are usually conservative. They don't really do that, but if they get an offer on the table and they see it declining, the thing is Carson wanted out. Their hand was forced there. Chad was declining and he was disgruntled. Their hand was somewhat forced there. Keith Rivers was another guy that was a high pick that they just kind of said, dude, we got to get rid of this guy and get what we can. I still think that, Andy, AJ, all those guys, Andy has his ups and downs, but he's been playing relatively well this year. These guys still are playing well and are probably plateauing at this point.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that email from Michael Myers, John?
So the thing about the Raiders and the Giants specifically is that John Gruden signed a 10-year contract. Pat Shurmur was also a new head coach this year. Those are two brand new regimes that both organizations are thinking long term, and obviously both of them have been at 1 win on the season. They're kind of in similar positions where they're basically tanking, even if they won't say they are tanking. And the head coaches want to get clear the roster out of guys that they didn't initially bring in. Get whatever assets they can to kind of build their own versions of the team, specifically with the Raiders. Gruden's already thinking about Vegas. He's not thinking about the next year in Oakland at this point anymore. Next year is basically, a watch. He's thinking about 2020. He's thinking about playing in that brand new stadium in Las Vegas. And if he can get anything for players that he doesn't see in their long-term vision, then he's going to basically get whatever he can. I don't think that's similar for the Bengals because Marvin Lewis is on a 2-year contract. I do believe that there is some light at the end of the tunnel for the end of that tenure that he's on. And I don't think that the situations are comparable because it's not exactly a new tenure ahead of Marvin, and these are kind of still his guys. So I don't think the situations are quite comparable. And plus the Bengals don't really do this often. So I just don't think that it's likely to happen because of those reasons.
Yeah. And the key phrase there, his guys, quote unquote. And I think when John Gruden took over the Raiders, even though Khalil Mack's a stud, he didn't draft him, all that kind of stuff. And I think he felt as if he got a big loot there and didn't, couldn't pass it up. Whatever. Amari Cooper, they got another first-round pick. Scott, I don't know if you heard the entire email from listener Michael Myers, but basically the crux of it is, could the Bengals be engaging in a fire sale at some point? Now, they're in kind of a tricky window because the trade deadline's on the 30th, and the Bengals are still 4-3 right in the mix of the AFC North, whereas the Raiders, one of the teams mentioned, and then we mentioned the Giants and other teams that are engaging in fire sales. They're not in the mix. They're collecting picks and trying to get as many high picks as possible. But could we see at some point, if this team goes 6-10 or what have you, could we see this team potentially trade some of its stars, AJ Green, Andy Dalton, like they did with Carson, Chad, etc.?
I'm going to say no for 2 reasons. One would be just the simple fact that I just don't think they are creative enough to do something like that, to intentionally. They don't seem to have the mindset. I mean, John mentioned earlier as far as like them trading and using picks like within the draft, and they just don't seem to have that mindset of thinking beyond. Okay, we grab our picks, can't think of the word right now. Compensatory picks.
Yeah.
I just don't see them having the forward-thinking mindset to say, "Hey, let's think a little forward." The reason I don't see it is because both Marvin Lewis and owner Mike Brown are on something of a ticking clock. Mike Brown is an older man. His brother has passed away at a younger age. His dad passed away at a really young age. I would have to assume he probably feels he's not going to be around for another 80, 90 years. And I think that's part of the reason why he's kept Marvin Lewis, because he kind of knows I don't want to have to go through that rebuild. I want to try to get a championship while I still can. So I don't see him blowing it up, doing anything, replacing coaches, anything crazy. And obviously Marvin is on he's kind of stayed beyond where he probably should have, but I don't see him doing anything either, because unless you're on a 10-year deal, like, you mentioned with John Gruden, where you have that security, without that, that job security, there's really nothing, there's no benefit for you to tank for the next guy. You're not going to, no one's going to say, yeah, I'm in this temporarily, I'll go ahead and tank, 'cause you can get a bunch of picks and get a bunch of future guys that the next guy can win with. Usually, coaches aren't that altruistic. They tend to be a little more selfish as far as what can I do, build my legacy, build my wins, even if it doesn't help the future, because I'm looking right here, right now. So for those reasons, I would be very surprised to see them do anything more than just like one random trade.
Yeah, and the 2010 and 2011 draft classes have really shaped the success of the Bengals in recent years. Kevin Zeitler was a successful guy in the 2012 draft, and Eifert had his moments. Burfict has had his moments, but even though he was undrafted. But really, those first two classes have netted the most stars. Those 2010, 2011 classes have netted the most stars. And as we mentioned earlier, the other high picks have not really pulled the same weight as those picks. So if the Bengals do engage in a fire sale, they sure as hell better get guys that can impact the game right away. We do have a call on the line. It is from our good friend John from Kentucky. First of all, thanks, Michael Myers, for your email. And John from Kentucky, how are you, sir?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Anthony. And you guys do a great job on this podcast.
Thank you.
And hey, this weekend, this is going to be a good game coming up against Tampa Bay, because the Bengals are not strong enough right now to dominate Tampa Bay. I don't think Tampa Bay is really going to come into Cincinnati and embarrass the Bengals. I think we're going to have a really close game, maybe a really wild game. So I think it's going to be very entertaining. And bear in mind, too, we got humiliated by the Chiefs, but we had just played Pittsburgh. And normally, after we've just played Pittsburgh, the game after, we don't do that well. How many times have we gone to the playoffs, and we just played Pittsburgh the week before, and Baltimore, and we're tired, we're half beat up, we look terrible. I mean, this is the AFC North, and the position the Bengals are in, regardless of who owns them or who coaches them, this is a smash-mouth division, and people get hurt in this division. And I don't know why. What's going on? We've lost 3 tight ends. What is it about playing tight end for the Bengals that is one of the most dangerous occupations in the United States?
Yeah, I don't know there, John. It's hard to explain, but I think that.
You still there, Andy?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know there, John. I think that unfortunately. I think tight end in general is just a dangerous position in the NFL, because you're asked to block a lot of times similar to a tight end, but you're also asked to go across the middle and take some big hits. I mean, Rob Gronkowski, known as the best tight end in the NFL, is on the injury report almost every week and missing games all the time. So, I mean, I don't think it's just a Bengals thing, but I do think that it's just a dangerous position to play. I do appreciate your upbeat nature, and I do appreciate your good point that you made about the AFC North and what that entails. Obviously, now there's been a Roger Goodell in this last couple of years has made kind of a mandate that schedules pretty much usually end on an important divisional game, because they don't like to see teams do that rest your starters type of thing. They want to see the ratings and all of that. And have games matter until the very last week of the season. So I think that's part of it. But Scott, your thoughts on John's comments? And John, we're gonna get you off the air real quick. Before we do, though, prediction for Sunday. I see a lot, like you said. I see a fun game, but maybe one with a lot of wacky turnovers and interesting plays. Your quick prediction on Sunday against the Buccaneers.
will say Cincinnati in overtime, 27-24.
Interesting. I like it. Okay. Well, we'll get you off the air, John. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Who dey? John, your thoughts on what John from Kentucky said?
Yeah, I think they would do better playing the week after they play the Steelers if they actually beat the Steelers for once. I think it's more of just a morality thing with constant defeat kind of gets you down, and that 1 week turnaround can be sometimes a little bit too quick. And to John's point, they have played the Steelers on week 17 a few times when they went to the playoffs, and obviously they didn't do well. And I don't think that's specifically just a Steelers issue or playing the Steelers issue, but you can't tell me with a straight face that these players aren't sick and tired of losing to the Steelers, and how that doesn't somehow take a toll that can carry on for the rest of the week. When you're practicing, you're still thinking about the game. You might not be focused completely on the next team. So yeah, if they did fine against the Steelers, if they were in the Steelers position, they wouldn't have a problem. It's just mainly just constantly losing to them rather than just playing them and getting beat up after the game, I think.
Yeah, I think part of it too might just be the team they play. And I don't know why there's certain teams that the Bengals, when they play, they shouldn't struggle against, or that, a certain team, like, you obviously should beat this guy, and they never seem to. And this isn't exactly what John was asking about, but when they played the Buccaneers, it just seems like that is a team that, for whatever reason, the Bengals, I don't know if they overlook it. And it's different coaches, different players.
Yeah.
But you go back, they had lost 6 or 7 in a row until last year. And the last few, they had a better record. They lost by a point when Tampa Bay came back and outscored them back in 2006. In 2010, they were winning. They gave up a halftime lead, got beat by 3 points. The next time when they played in 2014, the Bengals had a much better record. Tampa Bay was 2-10. The Bengals barely held on to win that one. They were, half a minute to go. Tampa Bay was driving down the field, and they were able to stop them on a completed 4th and long where Tampa just came short. So for whatever reason, yeah, you have those teams that, and obviously, he's saying after you play a certain game, but I think probably a bigger thing in the NFL would be like a night game or a Monday game where you have that short week. I don't know if Sunday night would have been enough to make the Bengals not play as well, but I think that may be coupled with the fact that for whatever reason, Marvin's teams, when they play Tampa, just don't seem to play very well. So we can kind of look at the game and think, man, Tampa scores a bunch of points, but their defense is horrible. It should be high scoring, but I don't know. It's so hard to say because when these teams play, it's just it almost looks like.
Remember that 2006 game with Justin Smith and that weird roughing the passer. It was like a 13-7 game. It was just something ridiculous. We're going way back into history there, but I don't know. John, you're laughing. I don't know if it's because you remember that game or okay.
Memory.
Okay. Yeah, that was a disaster. Guys, we have another good friend on the line, Terrell from Cincinnati. Terrell, how are you, sir?
How you doing, sir?
Good. Good. We're doing well. I mean, 2 straight losses. We're doing all right. But how are you?
I know. Well, I just got a couple points. I just think that we just kind of got away from preseason till now. We kind of got away from the mixture of the young, energized, and the vets, and it kind of slowed down when they played against the big boys like the Steelers and the Chiefs and the Panthers. And really, the 2 ones really was the Steelers and the Chiefs. And I believe the Chiefs, the Steelers game, I think the defensive coordinator fumbled on that one, and that's what they got the thing. And then the Chiefs game, I think the rookies panicked, and the vets kind of was lost a little bit. And a mixture of defensive coordinator too, and then a mixture a little bit of everybody just in sync. And then a third receiver, who was the second receiver, and everybody stuff like that. But anyway, I just want to see Westerman at right guard, some playing time for Jefferson, and Jim Haslett as defensive coordinator or defensive line coach. To try to, I ain't seen fire Terrell Austin, but you know him a little bit. Like that's
Well, a lot of good points there, Terrell. We're going to talk about him off the air with you, and you made some amazing points. Always appreciate you calling in. Continue to be a regular, sir. Appreciate it, and hopefully you get to win.
No problem. Y'all, this is the best Bengals channel on earth. One thing I really get say, y'all top 10 number one. Good points. Everybody, I like the little game I was playing about the GM game. I don't know if y'all did it on purpose, but that's how I feel what y'all was doing earlier.
Oh, nice. Well, I appreciate the compliment, man. You're welcome on here anytime. Appreciate it. And you brought up some great points that we're going to talk about tonight. You know, there's a lot here from Terrell, and you can go to, you know, obviously the coaching situation and possible changes there. I like what he said though about kind of the young guys and playing all that. John, I'm gonna start with you on this one because you do the weekly lineman on Cincy Jungle. You watch some tape. There's also a post on Cincy Jungle about snap distribution, and I thought Terrell brought up a good point about, hey, you know, things were working against Miami, against Atlanta when, you know, yeah, Willis isn't getting in the stat sheet, but he's in there. Sam Hubbard is making some impact plays here and there. Yet against the Chiefs and the Steelers, Cincinnati went with the veterans. They went with Michael Johnson. How many? I don't think they calculated it correctly because I think Michael Johnson is still missing backfield tackles against Kareem Hunt as we sit here tonight. I mean, there were like 3 at least where I'm like, dude, wrap the guy up. And I love Michael Johnson. I love him as a guy. I love him in the locker room. I think he's a good rotational guy in this team, but still he gets the bulk of the snaps. When's that going to change? You look at Terrell also talked about Westerman. There's just this bullheadedness with Marvin Lewis and the staff, and I don't get it.
Yeah, and the Westerman issue has nothing to do with veterans. Alex Redmond, who's a third-year undrafted guy. Lewis just has favorites, and that's just something that we've come to accept. And like, he's not just like Paul Alexander wasn't going to talk bad about Russell Bodine. Marvin Lewis isn't going to talk bad about Alex Redmond. So that's just something that we can just forget about, I guess. And I'm partially to blame because I brought it up earlier. But with Michael Johnson, I think it's more of just a thing about with Willis and Hubbard. I haven't been too impressed with either of those guys so far this year. And obviously Hubbard's a rookie. Willis is a second-year guy, and I expected to see some type of jump with him. And we haven't quite seen it yet. And I think that's partially to the reason why Johnson is still out there for more snaps than what we would like to see because, you know, we know what we're getting with him. We don't exactly know what we're getting with either Willis or Hubbard at this point. Hubbard's made some great splash plays. I'll give him that. But there's not been any realm or any sense of consistency with him. And, with Willis, you would think that he'd be able to do the same thing as Johnson, but he just hasn't really put it all together yet. And I think that's still something that we need to see before we officially pound the table against Johnson. And like to your point, like Vincent Gray is basically in the same boat as Johnson, right? Like why he's out on the field getting completely blown up on second level blocks, I just don't know. I don't know why you don't try someone else there. But specifically with Johnson and I guess Redmond, it's just that stubbornness, I guess, and it's just that bullish on certain guys that, you know, in the middle of the season, you'd like to see change, and it just doesn't happen under Lewis, I guess.
Yeah, and kudos to Rebecca Toback and our good friend Joe Goodberry, 2 very good follows on Twitter, as well as you, John. Scott, I'd mention you as a good follow on Twitter, but you're not the most omnipresent Twitter guy. But kudos to them in terms of them bringing up the amount of pressures that Alex Redmond has allowed this year. Alex Redmond's been okay in the run game. Mm-hmm. But he has given up. He is on pace to give up by far the most pressures that any offensive guard has given up in the NFL in the last handful of years. I think he's on pace for over 70 at this point right now, which is unbelievable. He had 6 against the Chiefs. Scott, you and I have been around these parts for a while. We've seen a lot of things. We've seen a lot of stubbornness from Marvin Lewis. I want you to touch on that point, but I also want to touch on another kind of caveat that Terrell sort of talked about, but didn't specifically mention, and that's Joe Mixon. Because my thing is with this is you have injuries to Croft, Eifert, Gio, and Ross. I mean, you kind of got to say, okay, we were this, pass happy offense the first 3-4 weeks, and we had all of these guys. Now we don't. Mixon still is showing, regardless, that he can be effective. Granted, it's mostly draws, delays, and things of that nature. So I want you to talk about a little bit about the stubbornness of Marvin Lewis and his reluctance to change some of these positions, but also Joe Mixon and the fact that they should be relying on this guy a bit more. The carries have dropped the past couple of weeks. They should be relying on this guy a bit more, especially with the injuries, right?
Yeah, and I think starting with that one, you look at the carries, he's averaging 12 yards, or not 12 yards a carry. That'd be pretty awesome. 12 carries a game the last couple of weeks. And the first three games, the first two, and then the first one back from the injury, he had 17, 21, and 22. So right there around 20, all of a sudden dropping off. And the difference is in those other two, they were losing. And it's almost like they just get away from what they're good at, what works. When they're losing, they tend to get away from, okay, we're just going to run the ball. We're going to trust this guy who is a very good runner when he has the ball. And the Pittsburgh game, he averaged like almost 6 yards a carry. And that's like when they played Pittsburgh last year, when it was early in the year, when he made that comment about how he's outplaying Le'Veon Bell. And in that game, he did. In that game, I mean, he averaged, 6-7 yards a carry, only had 5 carries and didn't touch it again the second half and was upset about it. But it's just sometimes they just kind of get away from certain things that work. And that's kind of something I mentioned earlier about the adjustments. Like, you need to have someone on their staff, either someone who's actually a coach or someone with them that says, hey, kind of slaps them with the wet towel or whatever and helps them get back, reoriented or whatever it is. And then as far as the stubbornness thing, like you said, we've seen that quite a bit with him. And I think many fans heading into the preseason and into the regular season were kind of hopeful that Westerman would get a lot of playing time and get a legitimate chance to be a starter. And that's something that I think from the beginning of training camp, the Bengals were pretty adamant and kind of saying that this guy is not a starter. He's not a starter, even though he was great in preseason. And I know Pro Football Focus said he was great in preseason. And when fans saw him on, in those games, he was great in preseason, and the Bengals were like, nope, it's either Hopkins or Redmond at right guard. This guy is just a backup. And for us who have been around a while, we've seen examples of that in the past. And the one that people who would be on the Westerman camp would be the most likely to call up is the whole Evan Mathis, Nate Livings thing, where whenever you saw them play, it's like, man, this Mathis guy's pretty good. And you watch Livings, like, man, why do they keep running him out there? And they let Mathis go, and he becomes an all-pro. But then there's also other times like Anthony Collins. When he was a Bengal, he was a left tackle. He subbed in occasionally for Andrew Whitworth when there were injuries or whatever. He looked decent. Like, wow, this guy looks pretty good. He looks like a good pass protector. I don't know why they don't put this guy on the line somewhere, let him start. So he hit free agency after his rookie contract. Tampa Bay signs him to a big contract, and Bengals fans are like, grr, cursing it. How dare you let this guy get away? And Tampa Bay, I think, cut him before the year was out because he just wasn't as good as we thought he was. So it's really hard to know with Westerman until they give him a chance. Is he Evan Mathis and the Bengals are just being stubborn and clearly stupid, or is he Anthony Collins and maybe they're seeing something in practice we don't see, and okay, he's good in flashes against lesser opponents or in like little brief periods, but at the end of the day, he's just not the lineman that fans think he is.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The Evan Mathis, Nate Livings thing, good God, that was just dude, really. And that's kind of what's frustrating here. I mean, you kind of see some things, and I guess this is where both coaches and myself, I really respect Pro Football Focus. I really like the metrics. I really like it, but I don't love it. There are certain things where you kind of go, well, yeah. But, I mean, in the case of Redmond, they're counting pressures that he lets up, and he's ridiculous in terms of that. But the Bengals, this is what I don't understand. I think the Bengals really like the quote-unquote nastiness of Redmond, especially in the run game. But then we talk about Joe Mixon not getting enough carries. So if you're going to be a ground and pound team and you want to trot Redmond out there, fine, but run the ball. If you're gonna do that and trot him out there where pass protection is definitely not his forte, the stats show it, then that doesn't make sense to me. There could be a change coming back. Billy Price did practice Wednesday. We don't think he's going to play Sunday. We'll see. But there could be a change where either he or Trey Hopkins could maybe move to right guard. Trey Hopkins hasn't been great at center, but I think he's been better than most people thought. I kind of thought he'd be a borderline disaster. Secondary position, typical Bengals offensive line deal. Let's put a guy into a position that's a secondary position and start him, right? So that's my thing, and I think now, just because of the injuries and everything, I think that Joe Mixon kind of needs to be a guy that they rely on, and I think the stats show that the Bengals run most of their successful plays. John, you can corroborate this, out of the shotgun, and they run a lot of their successful run plays out of draws, delays, things like that, especially with Mixon and his patience to kind of find creases. They noted on Sunday Night Football where he, even Chris Collinsworth said he looks Le'Veon Bell-esque on some of these runs where he's just waiting and finding the hole, and he'll get 5, 6, sometimes 8, 9 yards. And I think that's going to get the team in more manageable third down situations, which has been a killer for them the past 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, agreed. And to that point, like, just because Mixon can't run under center as well doesn't mean he's a bad running back. The best example is Todd Gurley, who if you watch Todd Gurley, he's a beast out of outside zone, but for whatever reason, he doesn't do well inside zone, and that's just a little bit. It's just a little intricacies in the running game where as long as Mixon is good in some place, they should just use him there. And I get that, like, in modern day, like, passing the ball is just more efficient than running the ball. But if you don't have the offensive line to pass protect, you might as well just lean on a solid running game where you're going to have success. And I think the Bengals have that, and they just need to do it.
Yep. We're going to get out of here with one quick, because we have the return of Scott Schulte. We're going to get out of here with one quick, just kind of general fantasy football question. Scott, and Scott, in case you remember, is our resident fantasy football expert. Last year, I was pounding my chest because I won my league. This year, I am a cellar dweller, my friend. Some of it has to do with injury. Some of it had to do with I took some big gambles on guys like Eifert, Josh Gordon, John Ross. Late round, mind you, late round. But it's been a bit of a gamble. Who are some guys now, or even if defense kickers, whoever, who are some players now, maybe Amari Cooper, now that he's on Dallas, some guys that you think, hey, waiver wire pickup, this is a guy who could salvage your season as you're midway through the year?
Well, I guess it's really not a great answer because a lot of it depends on who's available in your league. I mean, There's a lot of different leagues, and some are, guys who tend to be a little more savvy. And so any name I mention is going to be taken. Or
trade. If they're not free agents, maybe trade.
And that's not too, like, if you read any of these articles where like, oh, grab this guy, he's only owned in like 25% of leagues. I tend to be in those leagues where like they're the 25% and those are the guys that are never available.
Yeah.
But that being said, usually the best, just I'll give you a rule of thumb and then maybe give you a couple names as maybe like some really, really deep, desperate guys, depending if you have like a really deep roster. But a general rule of thumb that I've used historically has been you can't score points if you are not getting touches. So for me, the biggest thing is when you're looking at adding a guy, maybe on waivers, maybe someone who is out there because he's underperformed or hasn't done a lot, is the guys who maybe are getting a lot of targets in the passing game, but just aren't, for whatever reason, haven't converted that to a bunch of points yet. I mean, obviously a touchdown's worth a lot more than, a catch and yardage, but those are very fluky. And so what'll happen is early in the year, the guys who, get all their touchdowns front loaded in the season are going to be the guys who are getting scooped up in waivers, and the guys who maybe are getting a lot of targets are getting a high snap count percentage, who are used a lot in the passing game, but aren't necessarily getting those touchdowns right now. Those are the guys who are going to be available. So as a rule of thumb, those are the guys I generally target. And like anything else, it's not 100% foolproof, but generally the guys who, are getting snaps, are getting on the field, are getting targets, are getting, looks. Those are the guys who at the end of the day, at the end of week 17 and you're all done and you look at their numbers, you're like, yeah, that guy was available. He was out there. That was someone maybe I should have grabbed when he was available. And just a couple names that are coming to mind, because this is kind of just like shooting from the hip. But those guys coming back from injury, like Jack Doyle, who was a low TE tight end, maybe high tight end too, kind of a guy. But depending on what your situation is, he's kind of been passed up on as far as people's perspective, because Eric Abrams been doing so good. But one of the reasons Abrams been doing so well is because Doyle's been hurt. Doyle's coming back. He's probably available. He might be a desperation grab. Another really deep guy is Traquan Smith. Don't know if anyone knows who that is, but he is a receiver for the Saints, and now with Ted Ginn on IR, he's supposed to be their the next guy up. And his snap counts have kind of shown it the last couple of weeks that he is basically stepping in that role. And I mean, I wouldn't say he should be your top receiver, but he's someone to look at. Another guy, there's so many guys. I could just sit here and name a million names. The problem is it just depends on who's available in your league. And as far as you mentioned defense, one thing I'm a big believer in drafting defenses really late, last round or even after that. And the main reason is because it's all based on touchdowns, and defensive touchdowns are super fluky. And this is the time of year when, teams have cut a defense because they went on a bye or, something happened. And I'm a big believer at kind of looking at, okay, who are they playing the next 3-4 weeks? Who is this defense line up against? And this team, like, if you find that defense that has some really good matchups that maybe got cut or maybe isn't the best defense, because at the end of the day, you could take the NFL's best defense and the NFL's like 15th best defense on any given week in fantasy. The 15th best defense or 20th is just as likely to score points for you as that first best defense, because it's all based on interceptions. And you tip a ball, you get interception, you get a fluky touchdown, like the 2 touchdowns the Bengals had against the Dolphins. I mean, you really can't account for that on any defensive metric or project that. You can't really project, that Sam Hubbard and Michael Johnson are going to run in and get you 12 points in fantasy. So with defenses, that's a nice way to steal points, is kind of, and that way you're not hoarding roster spots. And some people like to have 2 defenses because they like to me, that's just wasting roster spots. So just kind of, I don't know, they call it defensive streaming, where you just kind of go week by week. Another thing, if you're, depending on the league, one thing also look at doing, if your starting quarterback has passed your bye, if he's a good quarterback, you may not need 2 quarterbacks, because some people are going to keep 2 quarterbacks on their team. And in doing that, you're kind of wasting a roster spot. And I'm a big believer you can never have enough running backs, because you never know who's going to get hurt. You never, kind of like you look at the Patriots, they lost Rex Burkhead. They put Sonny Michel out there. Well, now Sonny Michel's hurt. And now it's, someone like Kenjon Barner or James White is going to get more touches. Well, those guys may have been available a few weeks ago, because guys like Burkhead and Sonny Michel were getting all the love before Burkhead got hurt. And but if you were using that roster spot or on a second quarterback and a second defense, well, you missed out on the opportunity to kind of scarf up those or scoop up those extra guys when you could. So, big believer of hoarding running backs, like that Michael Douglas. One of them says greed is good. When it comes to running backs, greed is good. And yeah, kind of keep the positions you need and look for opportunity. It's a lot of guys will make waiver picks chasing points from a week or 2 ago, because the guy gets, backup tight end gets 2 fluky catches for touchdowns in the 4th quarter, and everyone goes and grabs him, and he hasn't scored a touchdown the whole rest of the year. Instead, I tend to chase the guy that, okay, who's the tight end that he got a bunch of looks maybe in the red zone, or maybe he had 7 or 8 targets 2-3 weeks in a row, but it just didn't work out. But this guy is going to get his when it's all said and done. Those are the guys I guess I'd say I'd be more likely to grab. So I guess it's more of a principle than a specific name.
Yeah, and I'll say this for me, Philip Lindsay was a good little week 2, week 3 waiver wire pickup. He was a guy that was just floating out there, and all of a sudden I picked him up. So thanks for the fantasy football info, Scott. Good to have you back. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. YouTube, Art19, and Cincy Jungle. You could get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Our thanks to Gene Thomas of Buck What You Heard podcast. He was awesome. He brought some great knowledge, and looking forward to this Sunday. Let's get out of here real quick with some predictions, guys. Scott, score prediction for Sunday. Do you think the Bengals right the ship? Aha! Do you see what I said? Nice fun there. As they go into week 9. Hey, don't shake your head at me. Do you think they get back to their winning ways this week, Scott?
Yeah, I think Vegas actually has. Well, they're home, but I think Vegas has them a favorite too, because I think most fans. Really? I heard they were a favorite. I didn't know how much, but I think most fans realize that they had that 3-1 start. They're a decent team. I mean, the offensive line hasn't looked atrocious like last year. The team has sparked at moments. The 2 games, obviously Pittsburgh, they always struggle with Pittsburgh at home. Kansas City is just a juggernaut right now, and the Bengals just were not on their level. So outside of those 2 games, the Bengals have done pretty well. Tampa Bay is not Kansas City. They're not Pittsburgh at home. So those are kind of the 2 outliers. And you look at the whole rest of the season, I think Tampa Bay lines up with some of the teams like the Dolphins and the Colts and their teams they've been playing this year, and the Falcons. And so I think it's a team that it's a game they should win. It's a home game. It's a game against an opponent who is not far superior to them as far as the roster or how they've been performing. So it's definitely one I think they can win. I'm going to say they will win. I just don't see them losing 3 in a row. That being said, I'm going to guess it's kind of high scoring. I mean, Tampa's had trouble stopping people, and they've been scoring a lot of points. They've been throwing the ball like almost 400 yards a game, but they just can't seem to run the ball. The Bengals pass rush has been kind of non-existent. So of late, I'm going to say they probably air it out. They get hopefully lots of touchdowns to O.J. Howard, who's on my fantasy team, and throw 2-3 touchdowns his way, but the Bengals score some more. And it's just pull a number out of the air. I'm going to say 31-24 Cincinnati.
Okay. And, a big difference going into the bye at 5-3 than 4-4, John. And I think a win, even against a, decent Tampa Bay team, not as good as Kansas City or the Steelers, but a decent Tampa Bay team, getting things right would make the fan base calm down a bit. Your prediction this week?
Yeah, sure. I'll go with a win. Why not? I just think it comes down to I think Dalton's a better quarterback than Jameis. But I don't think that I think until they put up a lot of points without Ross and Eifert, I'll just predict that they don't go above 30. And I think they're going to win because I think this is just going to be one of those weeks where the defense kind of feasts because they're playing a quarterback in Jameis Winston who was careless with the ball, and they might get opportunistic chances, maybe like a 24 to 19 or 17 win, I think. And I think going into the bye week, they're going to have a lot riding on this. Like you said, and you don't want to go into their at 500 when you could be 5-3. Buccaneers can put up a lot of points, but again, I think that they're led by a quarterback who could be making a lot of mistakes against a defense that is getting a lot of crap lately. So I'll go with like a 24-17 win.
Yeah, I'll go 24-23 Bengals. Barely win. This game reminds me a lot of last year when the Bengals had the Colts coming into town, desperately needed a win after losing a lot of games and a lot of close games and a lot of games that they just need this win. It's at home. It's against a team that has been up and down, and this game just kind of reminds me of that. But I think it's going to be one where you're frustrated a lot, a game where you're just it just bothers you. But I do think the Bengals get to 5-3, which, in case you're not a math major, that puts them on pace for a 10-6 season. Doesn't mean they'll end there, but if you get to the bye at 5-3, I think that you're in good shape going forward. We're so glad to have you with us. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to get out of here. My thanks to Scott Schultze, who rejoined us. Hopefully you make it a more regular thing, my friend, and to John Sheeran, my co-host as well. Again, get us on all the platforms that we've mentioned throughout the show. Our thanks to Gene Thomas of the Buck What You Heard podcast. Go check out his show because I'm about to go on it. So go check it out and enjoy the game this Sunday. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you to all of our listeners. We'll see you next time.